Namaste. Welcome, beautiful souls. Minchiate Monday, episode 6. And today I'm going to look at the 12 zodiacal cards. The tarot deck on the table is the Minchiate Signo, which is part of Los Scarabaeos Anima Antiqua series. And I have to say, I really do like the dusty look of these cards. There's something about the backgrounds, especially in the cards that have the colored backgrounds, that just feels really old and lovely. The zodiacal cards are numbered 24 through 35, 12 of them for the 12 zodiac signs. And they are Libra and Virgo, Scorpio, Aries, Capricorn, Sagittarius, Cancer, Pisces, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, Gemini. And I have spoke to the unusual ordering of these cards before. I have made all kinds of lists, charts, trying to figure out if there is any rhyme or reason to this order. There's certainly some interesting aspects to it, and I did mention when I was talking about the elements last week that I found it really interesting that we start with cardinal air and we end with mutable air. Air being an element that feels of a higher frequency in this deck, an element that we really want to pay attention to. And so there seems to be something about that. You will also notice that 3 of the cards have a colored background, and that is the same colored background that you will see in the final 5 major arcana, which are referred to as the airs, and that's what we're going to discuss in next week's episode. The cards that are colored in the background are not the only zodiac cards that receive a score. In the game of Minchiate, the cards that are from Capricorn, so 28 through 35, all have the potential of creating a score if they show up in a set. And in order to have a set of cards and get a score, you need to have at least 3 sequential cards. And the zodiacal cards, starting at Capricorn, which leaves us with 8 zodiac cards, can also be added sequentially to the 5 air cards. So for example, if you had Taurus and Gemini, and then the first air card, which is the star, you would receive a score, I believe, of 20, 10 for these and 5 for the zodiac cards. I need to double check that, but I think in terms of reading with these cards and having cards in sequence, that is certainly something that I'm going to play with in a reading. If you look at these cards in terms of modality, we have cardinal air, cardinal fire, cardinal earth, cardinal water. So there is no particular pattern to modality. Mutable, right? So this is mutable earth, mutable air, mutable fire, mutable water. Well, they do line up underneath each other in the way that I have them laid out. And I did lay them out this way, so 1 to 6 and 7 to 12. I did also lay them out in a circle. I've tried a few different shapes and patterns and still am finding a lot of mystery here. And then if we look at the cards in terms of element, you'll also see that the pattern is quite irregular. So for example, water. So here we have Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces. For fire, Aries, Sagittarius, Leo. So that also leaves me a little bit stumped. And I plan to continue to play with these, put them into different groupings and patterns, and see if I can figure out if indeed there are reasons for this order. There are some really interesting combinations of cards, particularly things such as the Ram of Aries preceding the Sea Goat of Capricorn. Interesting how these are all facing in the same direction. So we have the Centaur here for Sagittarius. And remember that a few of these cards also fit into other sets of cards. For example, Capricorn is part of Death's versicula, so this is 28. And so you might want to reflect on the combination of Magician 1, Death 13, Capricorn 28, and that's called Death's versicula. Last week we looked at the element cards, and I mentioned the tens versicula, which is fire, which is 20, chariot 10, and Cancer, which is 30. And you can also add the 40th arcana, which is trumpets, to that as well for 40 points if you have all four of them. But remember that in order to get the points, you have to have the sequence. So you could have 20, 30, and 40, or 10, 20, and 30, but you couldn't have 10, 30, and 40. You would need to, in order to get the points for the set, they have to be in sequence. And then finally, Gemini, referred to as the flesh, is part of the Devil's versicula. The World card perhaps refers to indifference and opposition to God's design. The flesh to gluttony and sexual immorality. Usually in this card we see two nude figures. And the devil to a personal enemy, a fallen angel, lies, things like that. And I can't wait to start reading with this deck and to see if these versicula, these sets of cards, are actually going to show up in readings, because it requires a number of cards to create these sets. I'm really tempted to plan for larger readings. And as I mentioned before, I really like the Romani spread. I have done a couple different versions of that spread, and I feel that something like that would do great service to the Tarot Minchiate. I did pick up Brian Williams' Tarot Minchiate, as so many had recommended this book. And I have to say, I am a little disappointed. There are great mythological references for these particular cards. In Brian Williams' book, there's no mention of game play, and so no mention of the sets of cards or alternate names such as calling Gemini the flesh. However, I do appreciate a review of the mythology that is associated with each of these cards, and so that was helpful. But I have to say, the guidebook that accompanies the restored Minchiate Tarot is quickly becoming a favorite resource of mine, and this is one that I would highly recommend. It has just the right amount of information, and I thought that I would share some of it with you. I have the Sagittarius page open here, so let's turn to Sagittarius, which is the card on the top right, numbered 29. This constellation was originally known simply as Archer, but was already depicted as a winged centaur drawing a bow. When it was introduced into the Greek zodiac, it posed a problem. For the Greeks, the centaur was a crude creature incapable of wielding a bow. However, there were two centaurs who stood out in their mythology. Chiron, the most famous, the wisest, the most learned, the renowned tutor of Achilles, Jason, and others. Some authors placed him in this constellation, but this wise benefactor and instructor of humankind did not carry weapons. Others see in him the centaur Crotus, armed with a bow and arrows, the invention of which is sometimes attributed to him. He was one of the most intrepid hunters of Parnassus. Foster brother to the Muses, he invented applause to express his admiration, clapping his hands during their songs. To celebrate him in turn, the Muses asked Zeus to place him among the stars, which he did. Crotus thus became Sagittarius. The Romans sometimes called him Centaurus, but he should not be confused with the bright constellation of Centaurus. Sagittarius ushers in the hunting season and the end of the agricultural work. As a centaur, he embodies a nature that is both bestial and divine. The horse-like rearing part evokes an enthusiastic force of action. She is already much more dynamic than the small pig at the bottom of the image, which seems only able to gaze at the earth. Therefore, it is about channeling her earthly energy into personal transformation. The human figure aiming its arrows towards the stars symbolizes the will to rise above, the desire to unravel the mysteries of the universe and the gods. And so the text goes on for another paragraph, and then each zodiacal sign concludes with a brief meaning, keywords and phrases in the positive, the negative, and then a piece of advice. In Brian Williams' book, it's actually not quite as thorough, and there is some contradictory information about the mythology of Chiron and the centaurs. And so it's great to have a variety of references in Paro Aguirre's guidebook that accompanies the colorful deck I've been sharing with you. The messages are brief and yet could give you enough really to work with if you are new to including zodiac cards in your readings. I expand through my arrow, I aim far, I aim high, I always go beyond. With sympathy and optimism, this sign sets out on an adventure, trusting in its good fortune. Their joy may seem naive, but it keeps their spirits high and infects their fellow travelers. It is pleasant to live like this. Crossing borders, moving, traveling, and sharing with others requires lightness, airiness, and a restless spirit. When was the last time you laughed out loud like a child? Awaken your fire, ignite your curiosity, and play some more. Let your instinct guide you. Remember that you are like the centaur, half human, half animal. Trust the beast inside you. Your wild side has a sense of smell and instinct and is intuitively connected to your nature. If you're lucky, Sagittarius will be part of a versicula and give you points. Better keep it close. The worst that can happen is that he has no one to play with, and in that case, he won't give you points. Sagittarius is a fire sign, mutable, masculine. Its phrase is, I go. If you are new to reading zodiac cards, spend some time getting to know your own signs, your sun, your moon. Get curious about where your Venus is in your natal chart, where your Mars is, and start to build connections. Another way to build more familiarity is to spend a year doing a decan walk and getting to know what tarot cards are associated with the zodiac according to the Golden Dawn system. That will certainly help to build a repertoire of language around the energy of each of these signs. In a reading, these cards could point to a certain time of year. They could help with timing. They could reinforce information from the element cards or a predominance of minor cards in a particular suit. Their interaction with court cards could also be very interesting. The deck in the center is the Minchiate Florentine from the same series as the deck on the left, Los Scarabaeos Anima Antiqua series. And on the right is Amparo Aguirre's Bomarzo Minchiate. I really like how the guidebook for the Minchiate Restoré, the cards for that deck are not on the table this week, includes some reflection on the animals that appear in the cards. And I think that is something that I will be able to read quite intuitively, based also on the characteristics of the animal in any given card. And perhaps there is a story or a reflection of the 2 or 3 or more animals that appear in a card. This is the first of the Zodiac cards, Cardinal Air Libra, which has balanced scales. There is nothing in the scales. A fox-like creature is on top of the scales and a porcupine below. As part of my preparation for Tarot Through the Planets, which is a course that I offered some time ago, one of the things that I really enjoyed was looking into the range of mythology associated with the planets. And that does help to build a repertoire of language and also an interest in perhaps a particular culture whose mythology is meaningful to you and that you will be able to use in terms of a reading. And I think the same thing is true of working with the Zodiac cards. The more familiar you are, not just with the astrological associations, but with the mythology, you will be able to build story. Tarot is, of course, about conversation. Tarot readings are stories that one builds through the question and the card's response to the inquiry. This is the Virgo card, 25. And 26 is Scorpio. And I'm quite liking the 3 different levels of color that we have on this card. It reminds me of the 3 phases of Scorpio: the scorpion itself, the serpent, and the eagle or the phoenix. I'm also quite intrigued with the back of the scorpion. I'm counting 7 sections on the back shell. And those of you who like numbers and detail, I'm sure there are other zodiacal cards where you may be able to work with numbers and counting details in the card. I'm sure also you could count the number of sections on the tail and bring some meaning into that. I think that some of these cards will be easier than others to interpret depending on your familiarity with the sign, and if you are already reading tarot, the associated majors such as the Emperor and the Tower. And perhaps you could find information based on your familiarity with the energy of each of the decans of any sign. And this is not a tarot deck that is Golden Dawn based by any means, but that doesn't mean the information that you have acquired over the years in studying the tarot will not be applicable in some cases in response to a question. And so we arrive at 28, the first scoring card in the zodiacal cards. And interesting to note that the mythological sea goat of Capricorn precedes the mythological centaur of Sagittarius. So these 2 mythological beings that are the only mythological beings in the 12 zodiac signs are placed next to each other in the game. When I'm reading the tarot, I am often looking for correspondences between Scorpio and Capricorn. And I really like how similar these 2 cards look in shape. Most of you know that I work a lot with chakra medicine, and the correspondences between Scorpio and Capricorn are certainly dark and mysterious, especially when Capricorn is associated with the energy of the devil. 29, Sagittarius. 30 is Cancer. And again, beyond the mythology, the zodiacal correspondences and meanings, interpretations, this is a 10. And so weaving together any significance among the fire card, the chariot, or the trumpets may very well be significant and something very unique to reading with the Tarot Minchiate. And how interesting that trumpets is a 10 in the Minchiate, because trumpets is the double 10 as the judgment card in the tarot, and one that I always look at really carefully when I get a number of 10s in a reading. 31 is Pisces, mutable water, final sign of the zodiacal year. 32 is the water bearer, and I quite like what Ije and Nadolny write. Watering the earth with both hands, its gesture is first and foremost one of liberation and letting go, for it cannot bear to be confined like water in a vessel. Its mind is vast and loves to evolve rapidly. His gesture is also generous without holding back. He lets the water flow, offering it to the earth. Aquarius is altruistic, bringing originality and humanism to the collective sphere, and his two vases remind us that inventions only find their true meaning when they are geared towards improving the world. And as I look at this card, it makes me think about how I might respond should this card show up with temperance. My mind wanders to various associations I have with Aquarius and the Star card. I find it all rather exciting and can't wait to start reading with this deck. And interesting that Aquarius is followed by its opposite sign, Leo. And wouldn't it be nice if this were the pattern? And so naturally, I was curious to see if this indeed was the pattern. The first card, Libra, followed by its opposite, Aries, and then Scorpio, followed by Taurus, and so forth. But again, another pattern that doesn't exist. Leo is the first of 3 zodiac cards that has a darker background. Fixed sign of Leo, then the fixed sign of Taurus, and lastly the mutable sign of Gemini. So they're not all fixed signs. We can't, again, make a pattern there. The shape of Leo is quite similar to other cards that we have looked at. And the more that I think about how I might begin reading with these cards and the different ways I might use them in response to a question is growing in number. This reminds me of studying the minor arcana in the Tarot de Marseille and becoming fascinated with the floral patterns, the ribbons, and other embellishments that deck creators included in the minors, and finding a freedom, a beauty, almost a gift, something unique that I could bring to a tarot reading. I want to remember, and I want you to remember, that your interpretation of a tarot reading is yours. It's based on your experience, your intuition, the way that you respond to a question, to the energy of a client. And there's a great deal of freedom in these cards. There isn't any one right way to read these 12 zodiac cards. And so whether you are looking at facings, body position, modality, characteristics of the sign itself, relationships with court cards, all of these and more might factor into your reading. I'm not sure what made me think of hope when I looked at this Taurus card. But here is another example of weaving cards together. And you might never in a million years think that there was a correspondence between the virtue of hope and the zodiacal sign of Taurus. And yet, if you were drawn to a similar gesture in two cards, why not? And the final card is Gemini, the flesh. And in some way, I feel the energy of a dance. And the more I look at this, the more I understand why Gemini is associated with the Lover's card or the Love card. There's something here about relationships, partnerships, understanding ourselves through relationship, through partnership, communication, conversation. And then you may have a reading where more than one zodiacal card shows up. And so the appearance of that other card will give you more information about what aspect of the zodiac card to speak with, the nature of sexuality, darkness and fear surrounding the relationship. Or perhaps, again, you might be working with the polarity of opposite zodiac signs. So rather than feeling overwhelmed, I feel immensely curious and hopeful about including these extra 12 cards in my tarot readings. Thank you for following and taking time to comment. I so appreciate your interactions. Take good care. Namaste.